Gentlemen, I don't want to talk, but somebody elected me, so I have to. Hopefully, unless you feel that you are internationally known, you've gotten a name tag. And you've grabbed your raffle ticket back there. Let's see. I got a nice stack of Cammy's gift cards. And let me. Okay, so start off, you guys probably recognize that picture. That's down from the Oregon Museum. I took that about 6 or 7 years. That's my we call it space. So anyway, I modeled the Great Northern Railroad. How did I get into the Great Northern? Well, I've got family ties to Great Northern. My grandfather joined the Great Northern in it's not too clear, but about 1906. And he started out working for the Great Northern, and I'm not sure what job he had, but eventually worked himself up to a station agent for the Great Northern. His first station that he started at was in the town of Belleville, Washington, not Bellevue, but Belleville, which is north of Mount Vernon, if you know Washington geography, north of Mount Vernon, south of Bellingham. And that town, like a lot of railroad towns, no longer exists. It's gone off the map. My mom was born there in Bellevue, so that's how or Belleville, so I know about that particular time frame. Since then, he moved around and did a bunch of different stations, but he ended up finishing his career somewhere around in the early 40s. And he was station agent for South Bellingham, which is, you know, Bellingham is the Fairview area, south of Bellingham. So his son, my mom's younger brother, was also a great, well, after he got out of the war, he was a signalman and he'd learned to key from his dad. So he did a lot of keying in the war, and he got out and he joined the Great Northern at that time. And he was a accounting personnel for the Great Northern in the Seattle office. And he then went on to become an accounting supervisor for the Burlington Northern, eventually, which the changeover with 72 or something like that, switch. And he became the accounting supervisor. He retired in 78. And then his son also was an engineer with the Burlington Northern and stayed on and became a conductor eventually. And his last port of service was working the Tacoma port with engines there. So the other thing was in the town of Gold Bar, which used to be a division point for the railroad in the early time frames. My grandmother worked in the Gold Bar Hotel waiting tables, and that's how my grandfather met my grandmother. So that history goes on there, and they eventually got married in around 1910. So having that family history, I decided I got to stick with the Great Northern. I had an early train when I was 8 years old, I guess, the Lionel, like everybody did. My older cousin, who was 6 years older than me, handed it down to me, and I don't even remember playing with the train. So I obviously had no interest in railroads at that time. And so we ended up regifting that down to the next cousin in line, who was also 6 years younger than me. So there was a 12-year span of that old Lionel train. So anyway, when I decided to get interested back in railroad again, it was around 1940, and my son was about 8 years old and just in time for railroad. So I bought a train set and started building a train layout, which was based on, I can't even remember his name now, the old H.O. Railroad as You Go, the old editor from
Lynn Westcott?
Yeah, Lynn Westcott. Yeah, he had that book, and I built that up. And I worked in construction most of my life. I was a graduate engineer in civil engineering and worked in construction. Traveled around the country, so I drug that railroad around with me. Tried to set it up in every place that I moved in, and by the time I left Massachusetts, I ended up giving it away because it was so badly beaten up. So anyway, I eventually retired in 2004 and got interested in GN again. And so I did a lot of research with the GN. I joined the Great Northern Historical Society in 2005. Bought a couple of books, Ralph Hitty's book, the GN Railway and a History, and George Word's book of Great Northern Railway, what do they call it, pictorial study. And then a lot of the reference sheets that came out of the Great Northern Society. So from all that, I decided to model the Cascade Division, which basically is from Everett to Wenatchee, and the area where my grandfather had worked. He actually had spent some time. I did get word that he was a station agent in Kashmir for a period of time. So I did get word there. So in my research, I got interested in the fact that they were having trouble running the steam through the new tunnel, which was built in January of 29. And so they were asphyxiating passengers and crew members and everything else. As when they built the tunnel, they did no ventilation system to it. That didn't come until 1950s time. So after a train passed through, they had to wait a good half hour to an hour before another train could go through for the tunnel to automatically clear itself. So they just switched over to using electrics. And the idea came that they came in steam from the east, and they came into Wenatchee. They hooked up steam or electrics to the steam unit, or dropped the steam unit, hooked up the electrics. The electrics took them over the mountain and down into Skykomish, and there they changed back to steam again, and then on into Everett, and then points north to Vancouver, and then south into Seattle out of Everett. So the 7.8 mile tunnel was open for service in January of 1929, and also in June of that same year, they started the new Empire builder service, east to west. So that basically established my area and the time frame. So I am doing the Great Northern Cascade Division from Wenatchee over to Everett, and during the year of 1929, and I've stretched it out a little bit to 31 just before the Great Depression, I guess they had. So in 2011, I joined the NRMA, and I worked for a friend of mine. Has a big railroad that he built up in Maple Valley, Washington, and so I joined his crew up there and worked on setting that up. I also, my house, I had a basement unfinished and I started finishing that basement. And I set aside a room of 13 feet, about 13 and a half by 22. And I continued to sit there and try to figure out how to fit 110 miles of railroad in that small railroad. And as hard as I worked, I just couldn't make it. I even, in 2015, when we had the national here, I went to the through the SIG Ops group, and I set up an interview with a guy and explained to him my wants and druthers of what my railroad's going to be and what area I had to do it in. And he sat down with me and we worked through some things and came up with spirals, or an E shape didn't work, an F shape didn't work. So I played with that and basically went into what we all call analysis paralysis. And I just kept trying to make it fit in that room and it didn't work. So after I finished the basement up in the other house there, and I thought, oh, this looks pretty good. So I think I'll sell my house. So I sold my house, and my son had been down in here for 25 years now, 20, almost 30 years. So I talked to him, he says, yeah, come on down and move down here. So I moved down here in October of 2016, and I bought a smaller house, very much smaller yard. I had 2 acres up there to take care of. So this house had a basement with 9-foot ceilings. It was a daylight basement. It had a family room and a big, fairly large bedroom so I figured if I knocked out that wall, that would give me an area of 15 by 32 to build my railroading. So eventually, that's what I did. I have my grandson who's now 21 or 22 years old. I told him when he was 8 years old, I bought him a train for his birthday or Christmas, I forget which. He lives down in California, so he came up to visit me, and I said, I've got to get something started. So I drew out a picture of my layout with the wall in place between the 2 rooms, and I started trying to fit things in place. And I guess we lost our signal. So that's the room. Cancel that. So that's the room. As you can see, I have on this end, there's a 6-foot sliding glass entry door. There's up here is about a 5-foot hallway that enters into the room. This was the bedroom area, and this was the family room. There was a closet in there. So I started just trying to figure out where in the hell I can put a helix in this place. So I drew circles all over the place and how I wanted to make this railroad layout. So eventually
Excuse me, Bob, do you mind making that full screen?
yeah,
I'm in the front row and I can't read it.
how's that?
Thank you.
All right. So this yard down here was
Spontaneous lighting.
It must be motion detected.
oh. So this I was thinking of sticking this in front of the door, and yet I needed to have access in there. So I eventually, why don't I have my new screen up here? There we go. No.
Nobody moved.
There we go. So then I did some more designing work and laying out, and I decided I was going to have a round the wall layout. Starting from over here, this was the gap here, so I couldn't have a continuous running layout. But I had a round the wall layout. I put a gate in across the door here. This then became my apple yard area, which is where they had a turntable and 24 stall roundhouse and an electric shop where they did all the work on the electrics. And then this area was Wenatchee, and this became Cashmere. And then I got around behind the area there was the entry. So I ended up with, as you can see, 3 duck unders, and I thought, no, that ain't gonna work. So, and a gate. So then I went on to the next, and I started filling out this area here, and you can see when you're drawn by hand and you don't have a computer, you gotta take shortcuts. So I crossed out that design in that area there. And I started up, so my railroad is a point to point, and the scenic part of the railroad is basically from Appleyard or Wenatchee on into Everett. But I wanted to have some feed into it, so I designed it to have a yard leading into the Wenatchee area and a yard outside of Everett. So this area here became my yard areas, and this represents the upper level. There's 2 levels in this area here. The upper level represents Hilliard in Spokane. So steams comes in from the east through there. This gate basically represents my version of the Columbia River. And you cross the river there just downstream from Appleyard. And then this is Appleyard. This is the electric shop, the turntable. I was only able to get 7, the turntable and then the roundhouse. There was 24 stalls. I could only get 7 in my area. And then Wenatchee and the town area here. And then all of this all changed. So from there, that's about when my grandson came up. So I decided, well, we'll put him to work to show him what it's like. So this is the picture of the room outside with the lower level, which I said was Inner Bay Seattle. I don't know if I mentioned that, but my lower yard that comes back from Everett goes into Inner Bay Seattle. So that was my 1 yard area. The upper yard area is Hilliard and Spokane. You see, I don't have the gate across the door, but all the walls were brown. I had 1 light in the center. You can see I was working with the spotlight, trying to get everything. So we then made up the bench work for Wenatchee area, and then eventually the bench work for Wenatchee, and then that was Appleyard, the one before. And then here's the wall that's between the layout. So my grandson left at that point in time, so I finished up decking up the bench work, and I said I got to do something about the lighting. So we went in and I added 23 lights, all recessed, LED can lights. They were 3000 Ks, soft white, 4-inch, and 12 watts. So I put 12 in the family room area, and then I put in, which lit up everything. Then I put another 9 in the bedroom area, and then there's the hallway in between, and it had 3 in there, but I added another 2 into there, and that really brightens everything up, and it makes the room light up quite a bit, both areas. But then the next step after I got the lighting up was to tear down the wall between the 2 rooms. So I started that. That, as you can see, now opens up quite a bit of area, and of course a mess too. This is another view of it. I put a header across and got that opened up. As you can see, I rewired the electrics into a switch on the other side of the wall there, and then across, feeding across there. That's another view looking the other way, out towards the door. And also you see I started an island across, or an approach area across here, and then this is a door which swings across that area. And then I have 2 levels of track to go across the doors, one at 41 and one at 26, which is elevation at. So then I painted everything. This bears sky blue, Home Depot bears sky blue. So I got everything all painted sky blue. And it really lightened up the place then. I had loads of light in the area there. This is the closet area, and eventually I run through that closet, and I have a little bench work that I still have to put in there and then come out, and I do have one duct out under, which we'll go into later. So then I started drawing the rest of the areas. This is, and at that point in time, I decided to be able to do more scenery and to have longer straight runs of traffic. Instead of having the helix in the center here, I moved it back against the wall. And the helix is centered in this room there. And then when I got out here, to be able to keep my aisle spaces reasonable, I ended up shifting over the center line of the peninsula by 1 foot. From the center line to here was 1 foot, and then I made the center line of the peninsula coming out. So far, as I stand right now, I am constructed to about right there. And I've left out all this area, so I still have, this is my access here. So I don't have to walk all the way around every time I want to get work over here. And so this, well, let's see, I guess I didn't move, did I? This is the Everett area. This is Port Gardner Bay along here. So a lot of the railroads, they had shipping that sent a lot of the materials that they brought into port there and shipped them in through out of Gardner Bay and Puget Sound. And there was a lot of industries along there. So I figured I could have railroads running out and put part of the bay in there. Then this is the Delta Y in Everett, and this is the Delta Yard in Everett. And then Everett has a tunnel which comes in, goes underneath the hill, because the rest of this in Everett is all hill. And it runs around underground over to here, and there's a station here for the Everett, which runs south. So going from there, what am I not doing here?
You seem to have shifted modes somehow on that. Because now you've got your directory over there on the left too.
Why don't I? What did I do? Let's exit full screen and go back up again and see what happens. Still not letting me move.
What happens if you click on the thumbnails down below?
Huh?
What happens if you click on a thumbnail down below?
Not responding to that. I guess it's got into analysis. There we go. So let's back up here. So that's the next level up on my peninsula going out, and that represents Skycomish, where we changed out from the electrics back to steam. So we come out of the Helix. There's a Y in Skycomish. And then Skycomish, and then going around here, there was a big lumber mill in Skycomish. So I've got a log farm plan for that. That's a sawmill. This is a planing mill and a drying area. Then this area represents the town of Gold Bar, where my grandmother waited tables, and I've got an old photograph of the hotel there. So I'm going to have to try to scratch build that. So we're doing that again, aren't we?
Double click on that.
Oh, I got all my family pictures now. Let's go back to Helix build. Let's try it again.
Click out, then click back.
Click that.
Yep,
Oh, there you go. Now.
Now click what?
click on it.
I'm doing it. Double clicking. So maybe. All right, now we can do it.
Look on Hector.
Huh?
Click on Hector Junior, see if it goes to there, and then you can go back.
Well, that's my grandson. Well, this is ridiculous. Let's get it out of there. Let's start over again.
Up there in the upper right, you got a Helix Clinic 1.
Yeah, but that's the same group of pictures, but I don't have any control in moving the slides on, so. I don't know why. So, all right, here we are back. Let's go down to Helix builds. There we are. So let's go back to. There we go. So this now is the next level up on the Helix. So I have expanded out again. I have 3 levels in the coming out of the Helix to a center peninsula, and then 2 levels in this part of the area, in this area here, 2 levels of around the rail bench work, and then 2 levels in here, and then I go to 1 level in there. So let's get out of that. And I got a profile here. This is a profile. This shows starting at Everett through the towns. This is called the run that goes up Chumstick Canyon. This was a relocation that was done by the GN in the late 20s. And then up through the Helix, across the top. This is I used to be able to expand that out, but I can't now. And then down the Helix out to Skycomish, then back down again to Everett, and then the return loop, which runs below Wenatchee and Appleyard. That return loop has a 11-foot passing siding on it, and it goes, it's all along Puget Sound. So that's and if you guys ever read the paper about how BNN services always gets interrupted when they have a slide, this is where all the slides occur and shuts down the area along Puget Sound. Okay, so we'll just skip here. We'll get into the Helix. So the Helix design, I decided to move it to the end. I started drawing up a bunch of radiuses. I wanted to try to have a 33 or 36-inch radius minimum. That would not work. The biggest I could make my Helix was 6 foot on the outside. So I started different radiuses, and I ran what the length would be. Those are the inches in of circumference. Then I started laying out all the different grades that I could set up on. And my plan was I wanted at least a minimum of 4 inches between grades of the Helix, between Helix levels. And I also wanted to have a separation of 2 inches on the quarter. On the curve, I mean. And so I eventually settled on, all right, 36 outside, 28 inside, and I was going to make my rail diameters 34 inches on the up rail and 31 inches on the down rail. And the reason I chose that as the up rail is because pulling a train up a tighter radius induces more drag in pulling it up there. So I ended up taking my up rail at 36. So I ended up with an 8-inch wide roadbed for the Helix. And I was trying to keep this inside area open as much so you'd have access to the inside of the Helix when you needed to. Oh, what happened? That was it. So then I started figuring out the railroad that I worked at up in Washington, he had built a Helix similar. And so he used cut sections of 1/2 inch plywood. So I decided to save money and tried to reduce the use of plywood by not cutting out half circles out of plywood and then wasting a lot of the inside support of it. So I said, all right, I'm going to segment it. I have an 8-inch wide ramp and I segmented in 30-degree section. That says inches, but it should be degrees. You can read it. 20 degrees or 15 degrees. And by that, I ended up with 12 segments, 18 and 24 segments pieces. And I ended up also putting my supports for holding the rail up. I used all thread rod in the center of the 18-inch or of the 8-inch wide sub road bed. And I put 8 of them in, which put them at 45 degrees around the circumference of that. And so selecting the 34 and the 31, I ended up with 409 inches of railroad per level. With 6 levels, I ended up almost 2,500 feet of track in the Helix.
Eat track.
That's 208 lineal feet. Come on.
Double click on the photo,
Huh?
double click. It's not doing it. If you're back in that mode where you've got the directory,
Where's the directory? This thing?
yeah,
I think some of these that I took were in a, oh, there we go. So I made templates up. This was a 30-degree template. And first of all, I made my base support deal and I did cut out a 1/2 inch piece of plywood for the bottom circumference of my deal. So it's 8 inches. This outside is 36-inch diameter, and this is a 30 or 28-inch diameter on the inside. So I laid out, this is at 30 degree, this is at 20 degree, and this is at 15 degrees. So I ended up selecting the 15-degree one because it closely aligns with the outside edge of my deal, the Helix. So I took, in using a chord formula, I decided at a 15-degree angle. This were the dimensions of the pieces that I had. This would be 12 inches wide and one trapezoidal shape. And this is the actual model that I came up with. It was a trapezoidal shape. This is 8 inches. And what I did is I did select the 15, so I ended up with a 9 3/8 top chord and a 7 5/16 bottom chord. And I cut these so that we had, and again, another thing I used is I used 1/4 inch plywood and I laminated 2 pieces together staggered so that I had a 1/2 inch road base. So what I did is I set this up depth for 5 1/16. So with 2 of them back to back, I would get a saw cut width of 1/8 of an inch. And I could rip out 4 straight rows, 1/8, 5/16 wide or deep. And then I set the angle and I cut the angles. And I just kept flipping them and I just cut out. So let's go back here again. That's the template. So at 15 degrees, earlier there was a number, there was 24 trapezoids that would fit in there. And since I was doubling the 1/4 inch plywood, I needed 48 of them for each level, for each circumference around the Helix itself. And by doing the job that I suggested and ripping these out so I could get 4 lengths out of, or 4 widths out of a sheet of plywood and cutting them by reversing them, putting them in the table saw. I needed 66 pieces for each level, which would, for a total of 288 pieces of these things. And so it took me 4+ sheets of plywood to get that many. Versus if I cut out the others, I would have had maybe 8 or 9 sheets of plywood before I finished. So that's the template. Those are the measurements in there that gave me that. And then the depth this way going from here to here was that. And then I put them together. So this is an example of how I put them together. So I had 2 here. I staggered it so that it's centered on that, and I bought a whole bunch of 3/8 screws, and I glued these together. So I glued and screwed them, and so that I had a 1/2 inch circumference that would go around that. This is my base. I started out again. This has room for expanding out into the island or into the peninsula. But I used L girders 4 inches, and then on these cross sections, I used 2x3s, or 1x2 and a 1x3. Here's a 1x2 and 1x4, and then cross bracing, and it's a brace this way, and eventually I cross braced all 4 sides of it. Then I cut out my piece of plywood, and as you can see, I'm still set up in the middle of the room. I'm set up right over the center wall there where I originally had designed to do that. At that point in time, I really hadn't made the decision to move to the back. But so I put 2 halves together. So this is a 1/2 inch thick versus these laminated 1/4 inch pieces. And that's just another view of where we're sitting. And then I got a plumb bob from the upper new header that I put in up there. So now we jump ahead quite a bit, but I built a little piece across there. I had my center line in there. I drilled a hole in a steel rule 1 inch short, and that gave me a guide in order to make sure I was continually building these all up in a circumferential configuration. And so what I did is I just started going around. You can see the stack of these things over in the corner that I haven't used yet. So I would start building. I started building down on that 1/2 inch plywood circular piece. And I just started laying around and I laid them down. And then I came along and I glued and screwed the next piece to it so that I made a full circle. And then when I got to one point, which was right in here, I screwed the piece in, but I didn't put any glue in it. Because eventually I was going to have to take this all apart in order to get it on there. So what I did is I built this up. This is probably 2 layers. Eventually, and I don't have a lot of slides that show the work in between, but eventually I got to 6 layers in there. I clamped them all down, and as you can see, let me back up here a minute. You can see in this section here, there's no support under the outside lips of these things. So long way. I put in a horizontal support, an L girder again, and I made a tapered octagonal shape around the underneath part of it and supported on all 4 sides around there. And eventually I went in and then put in a full sheet of 3/4 plywood cut to fit underneath that area. So this was all boxed in underneath the ramp area. So that was all boxed in, and that gave me a lot more rigidity in that. So I got them all up, I clamped them all together, and here you can see the 3/4 inch piece of plywood underneath that, then the 1x3. And they're anchored into there, and then there's a support arm that goes across to the center beam in here. There's an arm that goes there, and an arm goes there, and then a taper off of that. But I got that in, I set that up and drilled down all those holes for the anchor rods, so that they would all be in the same spot. So I drilled them all at once, so I'd have everything copacetic, so to speak. And I put the rods in and anchored them down, and I have nuts and washers at each location. So then I decided at that point in time, I'd already figured out that I was gonna move to the back of the room in there. So this is just another view. This is showing Appleyard, Wenatchee. This is the return line going back underneath on the lower level, swinging under there, coming into this yard area is again Inter Bay in Seattle, and then Hilliard and Spokane. So that's another view of how it was set up. Then I had to get a sub-road bed to put it on, and I decided cork. So I got Midwest cork, and you could buy that in sheets 5 by 36, and it was 3/16 of an inch thick. And so I built this template. I had a router, rotor router in there, and I routed out. Well, first of all, when I laid it out, I decided what that circumference would be, and then what this circumference would be, and how much I had to cut out of the. You have a square sheet of cork, and it won't curve around the deal. So you had to cut slots in it to make the bend. So I calculated the distance around this place, and then the distance at this diameter, and the distance at this diameter, which was beyond that. And I cut out 1/8 of an inch every inch in that 36-inch piece. And so that's what it looked like. So I built this jig, and I clamp in a sheet of plain cork road bed, and I clamp it in there. And before I did that, I drew my track center lines where they would be on that sheet. And then I cut out a whole bunch of them, and I just it took 6 to make one circumference, and so I had 6 levels, so I had 36 sheets of that I had to router out and make to fit my diameter. So then the next thing, and I don't know if you can read this very well, but the next thing I decided I needed to have a chart set up so that I could actually have some measurements. And this is the location in the circumference going around of where the rods came through the roadbed. And that's the degrees that they had. So he started out at 0 and he ended up at 360. And then this is the distance in inches between that. Then at my 2.5% slope, I was able to get the change in elevation that I needed to get for a 2.5% slope, and have a measurement located at each of the 5/16-inch diameter all thread rods. And then I set it up in a cube situation, and then I started at my base level was at 30 inches off the floor, which was Everett, and then 50 inches off the floor became, that part of the peninsula became Skykomish, and then 60 inches off the floor was the top where you came out of the tunnel. And I put a reverse loop on top, and we missed that part of it. I didn't elaborate on that when we got there, so I'm trying to keep moving here. So what I did is I unloaded all of those things again, took them all off and set them on the ground. So I started with the top one off and put it became the last piece to go in. the top piece. And then I put one piece in. And you see these temporary posts that I put up there. I'll show you in the next one here. This part here, so I was a single person lifting 36-inch diameter circulars that were glued and screwed, and if I twisted them or distorted them too much, I'd start popping screws out of them, these screws, because these screws only went through part way there, well, all the way through, but. And so I didn't want to do that, so I got up, picked it up with my arms to straddle it. I would get it up and set the top edge on top of that deal. I would slide it forward, hold the back edge, and then reach out and unclamp those deals, and that board then slid down, and then the circular piece would drop and set on top of the all threads. And then it was just a matter of adjusting the all threads and finding the holes and setting the holes in and just let the whole thing drop in. So this is 0 point here, but actually you can see that the plywood was 1/2 inch thick. So I came down, this is my 30-inch layer down here, 30-inch elevation flat table. And so I had to build a ramp that went out quite a ways around. So I tapered down. I just took old cuttings off of my fast track wood ties and just started putting them together, and then getting smaller and smaller, 1/32 down to 1/32 to make a taper from the 1/2 inch down to 0. So then from the chart, I had the elevations I could set my next bolt and washer. And there, and you can see that this part of the roadbed was not glued. So I was able to pick that up one layer at a time, and I would put one layer in. There I put, this shows how the road or the cork roadbed goes in and around. And this shows building the ramp area in here, taking it from 1/2 inch down to 0. And playing with some track. That's another level up there. I rolled that down. I put, this was all tacked down with DAP 230 silicone. And then that's the roller I used to roll it down. And I also clamped it. You'll see a picture of the clamps in there, but here's laying out, just putting track and staking it down, just pinning it down, setting it on in the level. And there we go again. Mark in place. So let's go back to full.
Yeah, I see what you're doing. Almost ready.
It's still not doing.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe that's. All right, that's the second level. That's clamping it down. This is the second level going up there. And I got the second level in and turn the cork roadbed in. And then I clamped it all down. I had billions of clamps going. I used boards to hold it down and while it glued. Then I glued the track in place. And it was about here I decided, well, it's the next one. This was level 3 going in. This is gluing the fit piece where the two came together that were not glued. The screws were already, screw holes were already there, but since I screwed it in and made sure everything was tight all the way around in circumference, But I unscrewed it and then put it up there and dropped it in. And it was this point in time that I realized coupon number 22 or 3 or whatever it was, that while I had put the track in, I had not drilled the holes for the drops. And I could not get a drill in there with a drill bit to drill out the hole. So what do I do? So I went down and bought myself a right angle drill attachment for my Dremel tool, and that worked perfect.
An
Fortunately,
excuse to buy new tools is never a bad thing.
yeah. So that gave me the room in there to do that. So that's going on up with some more, and I guess that's level 3. That's when I discovered that you can see there's no wires, no electrical drops in that area. Now here, again, that's I guess that's back to what I already showed, didn't it? All right, here we are drilling, started pulling the wires in at that area. So I decided that the circumference around the circle, the full circle, is 9 feet. Going all the way around. And I decided I would quarter that up, and I was going to put drops every 9 foot. Excuse me. That's 18 feet, 18 feet around the circumference. And I was going to put a drop at every quarter point. And I made the drops for the outside rail at the north and south end of the helix. And the drops for the inside rail, my decision is to make the outside rail a separate power district and the inside rail another power district. So I have 2 power districts in there.
Okay.
So there we go. This is 4 going up, and you can start seeing that I've got all the drops in here. We'll go into that a little bit later. That's another view. You can see how messy you get when you're building the room in there, tripping over everything, especially tripping over cords. I must have gone down 3 or 4 times tripping over my own cords. So then I also wanted to get some crossovers in there. So I ended up with 5 crossovers in there. So I had a problem with this, so I had to move that back there. You can see I cut out of here. The other thing is I used my NMRA gauge to make sure I had clearance. And then I also took a 85 foot Pullman passenger car and ran it through to make sure I had clearance from that center nut and bolt. This center line difference in here was 3 feet from center line to center line. So, and here's another, this is the end. This track goes along the wall, back along the wall, and comes around and enters the helix in here. So that's my first and only duck under on the whole design, is entering in the helix from this side. So actually, the duck under is right about here. So it goes in right at this level, this level here, across from here. So I have, and I'll show you later on, I have spline roadbed being built, and this is what I call the Chumstick Canyon area. And it goes in around, it goes behind the helix and in through the closet and out of the closet and into the helix at this area. I have another, eventually, I don't have it built yet. There's another small, about a 48 by 18 wide bench work in here that has the little town of Winton. Winton had a stock loading pen in there, and it also had a power plant loaded in there for providing power for the electrics. So there it is, number 6 level all the way up. And of course, all the after I drilled these smaller ones out, got them in there, that I ended up drilling the holes and putting and soldering the leads in as I went, once I had it right on top surface there, so that. And here's showing that this is the offset, this is the center line of the helix, right about where that clamp is. This is the offset center line of the peninsula coming out of that. Another view, some of the things, tracks in place. That's more of the same, but with all the track in place all the way up to the top tier. So I've got 6 tiers in there. And this is a start. This is a board, 1x4 that I put in to the inside of that, and I glued behind there. I glued to the bottom of the roadbed, glued a 1x3 by 3, not 1x3, but a 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch by 3 inch piece to the bottom of the rail, and then I glued it, screwed these in at each level going down. That provided more support for the inside of this area, so it was in between, pretty much in between the anchor bolts, so that gave me more inside support to keep the thing from tipping, the roadbed from tipping. And that also did that for the outside when I put the sheet on it. But this is the sort of, this becomes an electric chase in here, and I'll show you here. These are all 4 north, east, south, and west. And you see I put terminal blocks on all that area, and we'll get a detail of that. That's the terminal blocks in there. So all the drops went into that. And then this being the east one, this is for the 31 inch diameter track on the inside rail of that. So the inside rail was tied in at, if true north was 0, this is 90 degrees. So I had the inside track tied in at 90 degrees and 270 degrees. And then the outside track was tied in at 0 and 180 of a clock. And this shows, these are the bus lines. So my drops were all 18 gauge drops. So I actually worked part-time as electrical superintendent at a nuclear plant too. So I copped off a bunch of wire that was being thrown away. So I had a whole bunch of oil-proof wire from a nuclear plant that's gauge 18 gauge that they use for instrument control. And so I saved up a whole bunch of that, and then I cut that all up, and I'm now buying wire because I used all that wire up. But
So 18 gauge stranded wire?
18 gauge stranded wire for the drops. And then my bus wire was all 12 gauge. I made a pretty heavy duty gauge. These are EB1s, which are circuit breakers. I have an NCE system. So these are all circuit breakers for the inside. Let's see, that's the north one. So this is for the outside rail, and this is for the inside rail. Circuit breaker. And then my main power bus comes in here, ties into this. Then I have one line coming off this way and another line going back to this bus. And so my main bus is in there. And then what I did is eventually I went through, and you could see I labeled all my wires. I bought myself a labeler and did everything to label the wires so I could keep track of where they all went and what they were. This shows my H bus, and this shows the circuit breaker power, what power district I'm in. And then this is the main line coming into that.
Did you ever think of putting detection in there?
No, I don't think I was gonna do detection or signals or anything like that.
Just to track the train as it goes up and down the helix.
So there again, this is the main line coming in, and as I said, this bus came off this way to feed 2 sides of the circumference, and then this bus fed the other 2. So then I had turnouts. You couldn't put your turnouts, your switches you couldn't put them mounted in underneath because that impacted the deal. So fortunately, let's see, I had this pretty much memorized. But fortunately, Cordis makes what they call a remote mount system. And so I mounted these outside. I put another brace in here to stabilize that, and then put a T-bar out on that, and this will show another picture of that. And then I used Aculite, so I didn't have to do any soldering. So these are all screw plug-ins. And this is mounted inside the Helix. And there's three switches. There's a total of 5 Tortoise switches in there. And then shows that's the mechanism that sits actually directly under the switch. And then this is it has a sheathed cable that runs out. It's a steel cable that runs out to actuate that. So whatever turns and actuates here is transmitted through that cable into actuate underneath the rail system. So all 5 were set up that way. That's another detail of it looking. This is the actuator cable going to it.
That other wire that's there, is that in order to change polarity on the frog?
No, the other thing was that, and it doesn't show here, but on top of these things, there's a frog juicer mounted. So I put frog juicers on each of those. I don't have the frog wire. Well, maybe that could be the frog wire coming into it. Let's see if I got another picture here later on that shows that. No, this is just looking down the line. This shows the crossover. The one thing I think I'm going to have problems with, it didn't, when I built the system up, I ran a diesel engine through it. I'm not using diesel, I'm just using steam, but I ran a diesel through it. And my crossovers were straight crossovers. They did not have a curved 19-degree crossover from Fast Track. So I built all my crossovers straight. So, and let's see if I get the next picture shows it. That's just, this is more coming off in here, switches. This is what I'm concerned about. So I come out, I cross over to exit out of there. But you
That's
can
a
see,
big kink.
you can see, I may have issues here. That should have been the curved rail, and I should have hand built that in place there. But right now, it seems to work with one engine and with the car, with a Pullman car rolling through it. So I may have to do something. So that's one of the what did you call them, changes after the fact?
Oh, the design change.
Design change order, so that I may end up having to redo that. Here's now, I'm starting to preform, just clamped it in place. I let that sit there for a couple of weeks, see if it would start doing. This is showing the Helix now. After we got that built and all tested out, my son and I were able to pick it up and move it back against the wall there, the lower wall. This lower wall has a shelf around it all the way through, and that's because the concrete foundation was stepped out from where it was here. So that's showing the peninsula coming out from it, just clamped together right now. And that's showing the access there. There's an access point. This is where it comes out of it at the bottom and goes around the backside and down into Inner Bay. And that's fully enclosed now with the top on it. So that's there's a top there and there's a top here, and you can see they don't line up. But what I'm going to do is I've got right now, and we'll see it in the last picture, is that I've got styrofoam stacked and stored on top of this all over the place. I've been saving styrofoam to build mountains with. So this is going to be mountains on the top. The exit coming out of the top of the Helix comes out here. And then I have, this is elevation 60 level, which will come out at this level right to this point of the room, and then it ends right there. So we'll get to that. That's what the openings cut in for access. This shows the return line, the line that has the, as you come farther towards the screen, I've got a siding track, a 10-foot siding track there. Park trades on if I want. And this goes in and this exits from Everett. So that's the bottom of the Helix coming out here. This is the bench work. This area in here is Cashmere, and then from about here on is Spline Road bed built. And it goes behind there, goes into that closet and then comes out again. And that's showing part of how the peninsula is being constructed, coming away from it. And I used, again, L girders and then metal brackets to hold them and support them. And I've got a 2x4 wall in between. And then in the April 2018 issue of Model Railroader, they showed using aluminum trim coil, I guess is what they use for making gutters and some siding materials or whatever, but aluminum trim coil. It comes 24 inches wide and it's real thin and you can roll it out, and then that is going to be put along and cover the center of it, so it becomes a backdrop and forms between the center of the peninsula. It'll be on this side of the 2x4 and on this side of the 2x4, and then there'll be one scene there and one scene there, so you have a backdrop or a divider that goes down the center of the peninsula. That'll be there, so this will be all covered in that stuff, and you can paint it blue. It has a PVC coating on the outside of it, so it can be painted. I don't have a picture of it, I guess I should have done that.
Structural member too?
Well, no, it's not structural, it's just, it's very thin.
It's very thin, so it doesn't
Almost
break
paper
the structure.
thin, yeah.
You're gonna have to notch it for those brackets, right?
So this is now inside the Helix, and there's a 4-foot area in there, and you can put a stool in there, and there's room for a guy to sit in there and keep an eye on the trains if he wants to. I have cameras and re-rail if necessary. I have cameras that are in there, and they're on Wi-Fi, and they go to an iPad that I have outside, so the guy can look on the iPad and he can see his train traveling around. So there's 3 cameras in there that cover it. And then I use LED lighting. This is my head buffer. Yeah, which I, after bashing my head a couple of times, I decided that's temporary for now, but anyway. So that's basically it for the Helix. This now shows the state of my railroad as it was yesterday. So I just took some pictures to show you what part is done. This is the Hilliard terminal, east terminal point of the railroad. And it's got a Y in here for switching engines around or for turning engines. And this is the interbay area on the lower section. And that has a turntable down there. So I used 2 different times. I used a Y for turning engines here. And then down here I used a turntable, and that's a Walter's turntable. And then I've got a coal silo down there, a coal feed silo, and then a sand feed bin. And basically the track plans upper and lower are about the same, except for where the Y is up here and then the turntable down here. And then I built all of the switching done in the yard here is done with tortoise switches on the lower level. And because I didn't want people having to reach over and knocking trains over, go ahead and throw switches. The rest, and then on the upper level, I started with tortoise switches in the curve part, and I went to manual switches on the top. So if we look back at that other one, you can see these are all manual switches right here to route cars in there. And of course, I use any flat surface I have for storing things. And this is the panel board. In here I've got 2 switch 8 selectors for running 8 switches, so I have a total of 16 switches, actually 15 in here. And then this is the controller for the turntable, and then I have it set up so that I can switch power off to each one of these things, so when I have power running, I don't have all the engines parked in the yard are not making noise or sounds. So I can shut the power off to each one of them and just flick a switch and turn the power back on. That's the upper level, and that just has the switches in the beginning where it turns in to form the yard, again, the yard. And this is the other part of the Y, which comes around and through here. And this is the gate that goes across the door open. This is where, this took me 6 months of fretting and not doing anything. But I didn't know how to do. I was not a painter. I'm not a painter at all. But I had pictures of what Wenatchee looked like. And this is Wenatchee, and if you know Wenatchee, it sits right on the Columbia River. Columbia River comes right down through it. So this is the town of Wenatchee back on this way, and this is the apple yard. This is the electric shop. This is a Walters kit that was kit bashed. I had to remake it to look in the configuration of the actual GN electric shop. And there's 4 shops in there, and I also got a crane which is non-movable, but it's in there. And then I've got removable tops on all of these. And then the next picture. So the other thing about this, there's a 4-foot ice rack that sits along in here between these, and these 2 rails are what they dump the ice onto and then push them off into the cars and fill the cars up with icing. Then the next picture shows this is the town of Wenatchee going down, and again, it's just a lot of junk sitting on it, a lot of stuff underneath. And it has the hills and the backdrops painted on it. And then it goes through the wall here, right about there, and into the next room. So that'll be a tunnel situation there. And then this is Wenatchee Yard now that is built out. And if you looked at all of these were all 1/2-inch plywood with sheet homosoap around it. So it's all got a homosoap top on it. And then in this area here, I just have individual pieces of homosoap roadbed that I bought from Cascade Rail Supply that holds the track there. And then from here, this is the spline roadbed as it goes up. This is my music speaker that keeps me focused in what I'm doing. And this goes around behind the Helix. And this shows it going behind the Helix. This will be all mountains. And this area in here will be styrofoam up on it. And this area will be from here to here, roughly will be a tunnel area in there. In the mountains, through the mountains. And then this is where I'm working right now, laying track. Again, this is this spline roadbed with a homosoap top track piece on it. And this is where it goes through the wall there. And here's where it turns. And right out in this area here is the lift out gate that I've made to go in there. So where I have these tools set up right now, there'll be another small yard area in here for the town of Winton. This shows the elevation 60. This shows all the styrofoam that I've had been collecting from everything I buy. Comes in styrofoam, and I pile it up there. Got some trees, I got other stuff setting up there. I got bridges that are done, someplace to use them, and that ends right underneath, just barely underneath this steel here. Then the rest of it, elevation 50 and elevation 30, is going to come out all the way almost to the front, that leaving me enough 36-inch aisle space around the end of the Helix. So that's where I stand right now. The idea was that since my access was over on this side right here, I didn't want to have to continue to walk around that peninsula. So I left that part of it out yet now, but as soon as I wanted to do the backdrop painting, wanted to get the spline road bed in and my lift out gate, which goes right across here. And feeds into the Helix at that point in the back. Then I'm gonna, next step is to build the rest of the peninsula out. I've got all the pieces that are all framed, ready to go, but I have yet to do that, so. That's it. Any questions?
Are those carts the ones we had at the convention for hauling around? Projectors and whatnot?
No, these are Harbor Freight, Harbor
Yeah.
Freight gear.
Same type of cart.
They're
Yeah.
about 30 or 40
Not
bucks.
exactly.
And I put I got a 3/4 inch piece of plywood that's bolted down to that, and that's bolted on my little table saw there, and I got a jigsaw, and then I got a grinder, vertical grinder, a face grinder here. And I can wheel those around anywhere I need them in the shop area. Eventually, they're gonna have to get out of there because there's more bench work that's gonna sit right on top of them.
Yeah, I have a question about the also.
The home, so yeah.
The Cascade Rail Supply, was it?
Yes, I don't.
Didn't he go out of business a year
He may
ago?
have been out of business, but I bought a hell of a lot of it before he's getting out, but he had sawed actual profile boards. And it's about 3/16 inches thick. And he has a profile sawed. I think he's got about a 30-inch bevel on it instead of a 45. But they're all beveled and they're split down the middle. And then for the curve pieces, they have their saw cut like I did the fork bed. They're saw cut on that so that they can be bent to the shape.
Well,
Homosoap's a deadening supply. I bought my a 4x8 sheet of Homosoap,
right,
runs 44 bucks.
right.
That's par. And it's a sound deadening material, but
Oh, I'd work with it, yes.
yeah,
In fact, I've got some,
yeah.
but, one of the things I found out when I first moved here in 2010 was
That's
there
what I-
weren't very many lumber yards that even knew what it was.
Yeah,
And
Par's the only one that I've been able to find.
hard.
And
when I
Home
called
Depot doesn't have, Lowe's doesn't
Right,
have it.
when I called them, the lady secretary that answered the phone knew about it. But she asked me, is this for indoor or outdoor?
No, it's,
And-
they refer to it as soundboard.
Right,
Yeah.
but they were, at that point in time, they were having a problem with the supplier or the manufacturer of it, clear over on the East Coast.
And
And it had an odor to it. Some of it had an odor to it because I called the factory and the guy said, yeah, our digester is what he called it,
and
did not work efficiently enough to digest the
glue or whatever it is they use to. bind
well,
it
the
together.
organic materials in the wood or whatever fibers they use.
Yeah,
I
mostly paper,
think it's made out of paper.
shredded paper.
Yeah, so anyway,
Shredded paper, and
Yeah,
it is messy. If you could buy the rails from Cascade Supply for the
Right.
forms. It is messy cutting. It just,
right,
you just got sawdust and you need a
We-
mask with it. otherwise-
George used that back
Right.
in the mid-80s.
Yeah,
And we bought it in, I think it was 1/2 inch.
yeah, that's what I
And
got.
one of the guys filled up his garage with dust because
Yeah,
we ripped it into strips
yeah,
and then cut the saw curves in it to,
yeah.
right.
and that's what's underneath the track at the gorge.
That does
Yeah.
fine,
And yeah, it's been there since
Right.
'85.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's good stuff. I mean, it works good. It's sound deadeadening. And
right.
It's not. I
Par
wouldn't- I
had the
wouldn't make it
sheets.
Wet, made out of paper.
yeah,
Well, it wasn't wet, but it had a smell of like a sour dish rag.
We didn't have that.
Oh, that's the acid they use.
Right, that's what he was saying was this digester was supposed to eliminate that odor.
Hmm.
But I have some that doesn't have that. odor to it, but it is, in my opinion, it's one of the best base road beds to use for model railroading because it deadens the sound. And the club I belong to in Colorado, we had the lumberyard take the 4x8 sheets and cut the strips across the 4-foot plan.
Yeah,
Then we took first 2 of the strips, glued them together, following the path of your
Yeah.
route you're taking. Then we put 2 more on the outside, and that made it wide enough for one track, or if you did multiple tracks,
Yeah.
it would make it wider. And wow, that stuff was, so you did that spline method with the homicide.
yeah, I did, well, the spline I made out of 1/4 inch,
Yeah, and then
I
we
ripped down 1/4
we
inch.
sand it
masonry.
down and we could bevel it or super elevate the curves.
What's nice about the spline road bed is you can get your curves and you get
Right,
easements and everything fall right into place, and you
right,
just lay one out and then just start laminating and gluing pieces. I started gluing, I did the centerpiece, got it the way I wanted it, and I glued 2 pieces to it and it held that shape. I pinned it down or nailed it, so it held the shape. Then after that, all the pieces I added to it, eventually made my road bed 7 wide. I think some people use only 5 widths of it. But, and then I ripped down a little piece. I rip it in half and then I bevel the outside and I glue those on. Just form the road bed on the outside.
yeah. Right.
But then when you put the homicide on top of that, it's all the same.
So we don't know of any other supplier that has.
Not that I know of.
Mr. Plywood, Portland, used to have it years ago. I don't know if they
All
still.
right,
So,
That should have it. 'cause
Seemed like a
it's-
special order when we got it.
Yeah.
I don't believe there's anybody who actually cuts it down into road bed anymore.
Yeah, that's, this guy,
Very
if
nice.
Cascade is out of business, I was fortunate and I ordered almost. Can't remember, almost. 150 feet of straight and then about 400 feet or 300 or 400 feet of the curved track. So I still got a box full of it and I still have a lot of places to use it.
right.
Okay,
Very good.
anything else?
what size rail do you use?
What size what?
What size rail? Is it
Code
100,
83, code 100.
Code 83. Great, I use code 83. I use micro engineering flex track, which once you bend that, it stays pretty firm in that. I've got, right now I'm out of flex track. I bought up all of the last of the micro engineering track at Tammy's and nobody, I guess they're getting around to making it again. I've got an order in for another 280 feet with Micro Mart, and it's been on order since last March, so last March 22. So
Okay.
it's almost a year out. So I don't know what I'm going to do, and I may have to switch to Pico track and
Yeah, micro engineering is under new ownership. You got to meet them back in August.
so hopefully they get back in the track business.
I think they're moving something, yeah,
Yeah.
but it's a father and 3 sons. All right,
Okay.
thank you, Bob.
Rather long and involved, but it
So
works. I've got as I said, I've got.
No, I won't have a Helix. No, I was thinking for his AP.
Oh, he's getting there, yeah.
I saw several check boxes on civil engineering there.
The roundhouse, on Ashley, where it's the apple yard, it was all scratch built.
Yeah, we'll have to arrange a field trip and
Yeah,
see how much we can
get going on
get
that.
stored, yeah.
Okay. Reading it, okay. Let's take a few minutes, it's like Greg is, to stretch out a little bit. Keep it pretty short, say 5 minutes or so, we'll come back and Philip here will have a presentation on his Maryland and Pennsylvania layout, which I think is one of 3 layouts you own.
Yep, but that's gonna be the feature.
All right. So let me get set up for that. And we will get underway with Mr. Selinger. Hopefully I'm not butchering that name.
No, you're good. All right, guys. Being second up, I think I'm gonna have a little bit less detail than the last presentation, so just watching time, I think this will be about a half hour or
That'd
so.
be perfect.
Okay. So you don't have to be from Maryland or from Pennsylvania. If you were modeling in the 50s and 60s to know about the Mon Pa, because it was.
Model railroad was full of it.
It was really featured, well, it wasn't just model railroader, it was also, it was also the builders, the model builders. Maybe they were picking up from model railroader, but GEM and there were a whole bunch of companies.
Ten wheeler that was the Mon.
Yeah, yeah, and they did passenger
I
set.
have one of those still.
So let's do the next slide.
Okay, hang on.
Jeff has kindly offered to be my clicker. So probably like a lot of you in the room, my early influences in doing model railroading was, of course, John Allen, who seemed to be way ahead of his time with some of his techniques. A lot of what he did influenced what came after. And then, as we were just saying, that model railroader did a couple of layouts. For me, the series they did on the Portage Hill and Communipaw layout was one of them in 1961. In 1961, I would have been 9 years old. But I remember they did have the Pacific Fast Mail consolidation included in their feature of that layout series. And then in 1965, of course, they came out with the whole series on the Mon Pa, which was reprinted in this magazine, which maybe some of you have seen at different times. There was also a series of articles about Bud Seaman's version of the Mon Pa, and he was a guy who was featured in Railroad Model Craftsman a few times. And then finally, the ubiquitous Pacific Fast Mail United consolidation based on the Mon Pa Baldwin locomotive. You see those all over the place, and it was the first brass locomotive I ever bought, and I still have it, of course. Next. So the Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad was created in 1901 as a consolidation of 2 former narrow gauge railroads, the Baltimore and Lehigh and the York Southern Railroad companies, coming from opposite directions, all with bigger ambitions about getting into the coal fields of Pennsylvania, but they really didn't get that far. Next. So even back in the 30s, there were railfan trips on the Mon Pa. And as George Hilton said in his book, pictured there, any of the hundreds of visitors who came to see the Mon Pa between 1935 and 1954 might easily have concluded that the whole thing came from the mind of some Velazquez or Rembrandt among model railroaders, who, having exhausted his art in HO and O gauges, came finally to the hills north of Baltimore to create a masterpiece at a scale of 12 inches to the foot. It's almost a perfect layout for a model railroad because it has very little tangent track in the whole thing. So you can wrap it around all kinds of obstacles. It was 77.2 miles long, but between Baltimore and York, as the crow flies, is a distance of 44 miles. So it took almost twice the distance to do what you could have done with an airplane. It had 476 curves, which was 47% of the total mileage. 100 of those curves were sharper than 14 degrees. 55 were greater than 16 degrees. That was more than the Denver and Rio Grande Western. There were 12 summits with a maximum of 2.8% grades. And there were 144 bridges totaling 11,155 feet in length. So it basically 2 miles worth of bridges over the course of the railroad, which really belies its narrow gauge heritage. It was a standard gauge railroad built to narrow gauge standards. So I just thought I'd give reference to some other influences I've had in my more recent modeling work. You may recognize a lot of these names. Gerald McGee did the Pooey and Pooey, which was a vintage layout that I picked up on early in my modeling work. Bill Henderson did the Coal Belt Railroad. He loved camelback locomotives, and he did a very resourceful modeling techniques to build a fairly small but interesting layout, I thought. And of course, we know about George Celios's fine scale Franklin and South Manchester layout. Of course, he's the kit builder most of us know about. Bob Van Gilder makes wonderful kits, but he also has a fantastic layout. And if you go to his website, you can see what his layout looks like. Locally, Paul Scholes was somebody I visited during one of the NMRA tours up north. He was, and I have his 3 DVDs. If you haven't picked up his DVDs, they're wonderful, not just for his instructional information, but just to see his layout. It's fantastic SN3 layout. And then Jack Burgess, also at the Sacramento convention, I got a chance to see his layout. He's tends to be pretty meticulous, which tends to be the way I am as well. I have a hard time throwing litter and overdoing the weathering. Then there's another guy, George Pearson, who's been in the press a little bit. He did a vintage layout in Pennsylvania, a narrow gauge line that runs into the Pennsylvania Railroad. And then I also admired the research work that the New England, Berkshire and Western Railroad folks did at Rensselaer Polytechnic. They did write-ups, some documentation of how to research and how things looked 100 years ago. Next. So I'm modeling 1914. Most MonPA modelers are doing the transition era, but I selected 1914 because that's when the railroads were in their prime. By 1916, we had over 250,000 miles of railroad supported by 1.7 million workers. I think it was like 1 in 10. I was going to say that 1 in 10 employees in the country work for the railroads. Architecture was interesting with wood and masonry buildings. Wagons and buggies were still primary transport. Diesels were in the future. Steam was king. Rolling stock and motive power was smaller, well suited to a compressed train layout. Machinery was more mechanical and interesting. And also I enjoy doing the historic research to find out how things were back then, what advertisements looked like. And then that's when my parents were born, so why not? Next. So the MonPA was just stretching its legs in 1914. George Hilton in his book called it the glory years. It was a busy railroad with class 1 railroad connections in Baltimore and York. In Baltimore, it was to Pennsy and the B&O. In York, it was to Pennsy and the Western Maryland. Gross revenue had just peaked in 1913, 573 employees. The Baltimore yard, which was kind of the main servicing yard, was expanded in 1910. By 1914, secondhand locomotives that they had picked up from the Pennsy were being replaced with the first heavy consolidations that the MonPA eventually owned. And the narrow gauge roadbed was improved and many of the trestles were rebuilt, in part because they were getting those heavy consolidations. The old trestles couldn't support some of the heavier equipment. What do we do? Can we back up 1 second? Just show so this is the MonPA here. This is Pennsylvania up here, Susquehanna River's over here, Baltimore's down here. So the MonPA did, as you can see, a somewhat circuitous route between York and Baltimore. And they were competing with the Northern Central Railroad, which became part of the Pennsy, and the Western Maryland Railroad further to the west. And you can see there were lots of stops. These stations were like, sometimes a mile apart, and sometimes they were no more than a small shelter. Okay, next. So modeling 1914 has some challenges, but there was also some things that helped me out. Some of the challenges were photography from that early in the history of the railroad was pretty scarce. Of course, there were no color images. And for modeling, there were a few off-the-shelf models. There were a few, but not that many. You have to customize everything, decals even had to be customized, and almost everything has to be backdated. Some of the aids I had was, again, the Hilton book. This is considered by modelers of the Ma and Pa the Bible. I mean, this is a good resource. Sanborn insurance maps. When you're going back in time, sometimes that's the only information you have, and actually it's generally quite good information. There is a historic society for the Ma and Pa, so there's an archivist for the society, and you can ask questions and get information that way. There are complete track maps for all 77 miles, and I have acquired all those track maps. There's also a guy who's a retired architect who did architectural drawings of every single station and significant building on the Ma and Pa. So that was a huge help. Dick Weatherby is the guy's name. And for example, you'll see a roundhouse, and I had drawings that were, like 3 feet by 4 feet to work from to do the roundhouse. There's a groups IO, like there are for a lot of different modeling topics for the Ma and Pa. And also, I forget the gentleman's name, the product development guy at Bachman was a Ma and Pa fan.
Lee Riley,
Exactly, yeah, Lee Riley.
he was the vice president when he passed away.
Right, okay. And so he was a Ma and Pa fan, and you guys probably know that Bachman came out with the 440 Richmond locomotive, and also the 10-wheeler, number 2728. So that was a big help, just to have those off-the-shelf models available. And then I found that I could modify LaBelle freight and Northeastern passenger car kits to get a lot of the rolling stock. And then also significantly, I found some actually pretty young guys back east who I've become good friends with, and I've actually visited their layouts who model the Ma and Pa. So I've got pen pals that I can talk to and swap photos with. Next. So I mentioned the Sanborn insurance maps, and if you haven't used these for your work, they're really a great resource. Not only do they give you the layout of the buildings, but also the general material of the buildings, how many floors they were, and there's annotations as well. But for example, the yellow is all wood structures, and the red or pink is brick or masonry structures. Okay, next. So my Gibbons and druthers were to have point-to-point operation with the option for continuous operation. Urban scenery with switching and interchange activity in York and Baltimore. Iconic scenes at Delta, Bel Air, and Rocks, which is just a very small sampling of the number of stations along the line. There was one significantly long trestle on the Ma and Pa. I wanted to pick that up. And then I wanted to have walk-around configuration using DCC with easy access to the active locations. Narrow aisles were okay, because I am mostly a loner, but that was a tough trade-off, because I did end up with aisles that are more narrow than I would have liked. Minimum radius is 22 inches with number 6 turnouts. At a glance, the layout fills a 15 by 21 finished room with balanced lighting, 22, like I just said, minimum radius, 100 feet of main line with interchanges at either end with the Pennsy and the B&O. hidden return loops at New York and Baltimore, each with a single staging track. It's all code 70 plus Shinohara, specialty turnouts and crossings, Sport Road Bed, North Coast Engineering, DCC, Tortoise Machines, Live Frogs, 42-inch bench height, no grades on the main line, and I'll come back to that in a second. Grid framing, plywood deck, insulation foam for the scenery, cardboard strip, screen, rock mold, sculptural mold, and the iconic structures are all scratch built. Others are either modules, kits, or kit bash. We just heard the discussion about helixes. And I decided that given that the mom and pa ran 4 4.0s and 2 6.0s, that a helix was going to be a challenge. Unless you had a really large helix with really gentle grades. In fact, my 2 pen pal buddies back east, they put in helixes for their layout. And they say they can't pull hardly anything up the grade except when they put their diesels on the front of the, because they're doing the transition area, they could run diesels. So I decided I wanted everything, at least on the main line, to be dead flat. So this is the layout as it turned out. You can't see details here, but basically it's almost like a switching layout because I don't have very much between the 2 terminus cities. But this is all York here, which was actually a very industrial city. Over here is Baltimore, all the way over to that corner with the B&O belt line, an elevated belt line running here. And then in between, there's Delta, which is right on the Mason-Dixon line between Maryland and Pennsylvania. Rocks, which is a scenic area in Maryland. There's the Gross Trestle. Bel Air's on the opposite wall over there. And up here, you can see the engine servicing area in Baltimore. Okay, next. So basically, there were 7 compressed scenes. I wish I had more running room in between the scenes, but I do have scenery that helps break that up. And again, there's a lot of switching opportunity regardless. So basically we have Baltimore, Maryland, about 16 lineal feet. There was I have a fictitious mill district at the end of the Baltimore yard area. The mom and pop actually did not service those mills, but it had all those great South River kits. And I wanted to put some of those to use. And there was a mill district that was very close to the mom and pop. It was actually serviced more by the Northern Central Railroad. So anyway, I've created a little bit of a mill district as well. Bel Air, the Gross Trestle, the long trestle I talked about, Rock State Park, Delta, and York. Next. So Baltimore features, actually, I did a 3-to-1 compression on Baltimore. So I modeled Baltimore squinched down by 3-to-1. So there's 16 feet of modeled space. Falls Road runs the length of that space along the Jones Falls Creek. And there is a working streetcar line in the middle of Falls Road, which isn't there today, but it was back in 1914. Oak Street Station at North Avenue. North Avenue is a pretty major street in Baltimore. Freight house that was built in 1911 and burned in 1922. So it wasn't around very long. 17-stall roundhouse, built the plans. And I have coal docks, both the original one that was for the Baltimore and Lehigh, not yet torn down, and the newer docks for the Mom and Pa. City Ice Company and the Pensy interchange doubles as the lead for a reverse loop under Baltimore. And I modeled the B&O interchange to the elevated belt line. And again, that mill district at the north end. Next. So I had modeled when I was a teenager, and then I took many years away from modeling, and I hadn't done any significant scratch building until I decided to model the Oak Street Station in Baltimore. And it was actually a pretty challenging job. And this just shows you some of the phases of getting that put together. It's a bi-level station. The streets at one level and the tracks are down below. But we go to the next slide. So here's how it turned out. This is the prototype photo, of course. And so I was pretty happy with it, but I couldn't have done it without those architectural plans. This is a pretty complicated building. But the plans were all done to HO scale. So that was extremely helpful. Okay, next. So this is the trackside view of that station with the stairs coming down to the tracks. And that's the prototype photo again.
Oh, handicap, so.
Not exactly. No. Okay, next. The other challenging scratch build project was the roundhouse. It's a 17 stall roundhouse. I wanted to do it all. This guy, Bud Seema, who I mentioned before, back in the NMRA publication in the 60s, I think he did an article on building this roundhouse, chopping off the back end of it and putting it up against the wall to save space. And so that's what I did. Fortunately, the center bays of the roundhouse were used in a machine shop. So it didn't matter if they were too short for locomotives, but I still had about half a dozen, 8 or so usable bays on either side. That's a diamond scale model, so turntable in the middle. Next. That's how it turned out, and there's 3 of the prototype photos of the roundhouse. My backdrop isn't the best, but you can see how I kind of faked blending it into the backdrop there, and it actually works pretty well.
Yeah, I really can't tell. Good job.
And the walls are stone, and the next slide will show you.
Can you show on the roof is what is paint and what is that line there? That's paint.
There's the paint line.
All right, all right.
The trees are, the old sponge technique, but there were a lot of trees around it at the time, if you can see in the lower picture. All right. So I thought I'd mention a little bit about material I use for both the roundhouse and for this Oak Street station. And it's made by the same guys who make sculptor mold. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen this stuff. It's called balsa film. And the nice thing about it is you can easily carve rock work with it. Because if you get a unique, entryway where you need to do a, keystone and the whole arch, you're not going to be able to find off the shelf representation of that. So this stuff was really nice. It comes in 1/2 inch thick sheets. So I got that 1/2 inch down to 1/4 inch by running it through a bandsaw. You may not have a bandsaw, but if you can find a way to do that, it makes it actually pretty workable. And I have 2 samples here. But it's naturally rough enough to look like stone. But then you can just carve it with almost anything, a screwdriver or any kind of anyway. So that was very useful for doing this kind of stonework. And I got my balsa foam at Blick Art Supply in Portland.
So they have it at Blix?
Yes. Okay, next. So here's an example of one of those challenges. The freight house in Baltimore, again, didn't last very long. And I had only 2 photographs. I actually dug really deeply into the Ma and Pa archives. This is probably the best photograph I had. That was a sort of a trackside view of it. And the other one was a very fuzzy view taken from the coal dock on the other side of the creek where the Pennsylvania Railroad had their yard. And as you can see, that's a very fuzzy image. So I came up with a compressed but image of it that I think basically honors at least basic form. The Ma and Pa was a big milk hauler. There were a lot of farms along the route, so milk cans show up at all the stations. The other thing I might mention is, I had 16 feet of cobblestones to carve into the street, because Falls Road,
Way.
so it took me a long time to do all those cobblestones. But it is a working streetcar line, so then the challenge, of course, is to get the streetcars to work smoothly going through all that track work, all the cobblestone work. This is carved brick over here. This was all hand carved as well. Okay, next. So here are some scenes from Baltimore. This is the Belt Line, which was elevated over the Jones Falls Valley. And a little bit of history, this line in this direction, the line to the south, went into a long tunnel. And you couldn't run steam engines through that tunnel. Pennsylvania Railroad later would have the same problem. So they electrified that stretch of track into downtown Baltimore. And to do that, they put in a third rail. And they had these tunnel motors that would haul the steam locomotives only in the uphill direction. Downhill, the steam engines could coast into the city. So I have modeled the third rail, and I found a couple of steeple cabs that could service those tunnel motors.
That was the Howard Street Tunnel.
That's Howard Street Tunnel was the Pennsylvania Railroad's tunnel. Pretty sure, positive. That whole area in the Jones Falls Valley was a spaghetti bowl of track work between the Pennsy and the B&O, and to a lesser extent the Ma and Pa.
Did the electric service also come at the demand of the city to clean the air up at that time?
I don't believe so. I think it was really just for running in the tunnels.
Because I know cities like Chicago started,
I think that came later when
as diesels came in during the 30s.
Yeah.
40s.
Yeah.
Because of air pollution was so thick.
Okay, next. I'm not going to show you much of Bel Air because there isn't much to show. Those are the prototype shots at the station. The station actually was made available as a kit by the Historic Society. So I have the kit, I just haven't built it yet. But I got the track down and it's working. Next. Oh, back up one quick second. I'll just show you, for example, here's the track map for Bel Air. So very useful. If you can find those for whatever you're modeling. Here's the gross trestle. Mine is somewhat compressed. And it was on a curve, which of course comes in handy when you're doing modeling work. Normally the Ma and Pa would not run a train that big, but that was a rail fan train. I don't know what year that shot was taken, but those are Pennsy commuter coaches being used for the rail fan trip. Okay, next. Rock State Park in Maryland was a very scenic location. Popular spot for photographing the Ma and Pa, and I wanted to pick that scene up. There was the Ramsey Hotel. I didn't have room to do the whole length of the hotel, so I just did the front part and hid the back end with trees pretty much. And there was a water tank there. There were like half a dozen water tanks along the line. Next. And this is some of the countryside. You can probably recognize some of these as kits because they all are kits. I might give my wife credit. She built 3 of the houses in the top photograph there. And she did actually quite a nice job, I thought. Next. A couple more quick scenes. You'll recognize maybe that house as a Sears house that I think Bachman put out. Next. Delta, we're going to skip over Delta pretty quickly because it's also under development, although my wife Patricia built at least 2 of those buildings there. Delta was known for its slate mining businesses in that area. And one regret I have is I didn't have room to do a proper representation of that whole operation, but I did do a very small siding and a little bit of a slate loading area, just to be kind of a placeholder for what that was all about. Next. So York is the industrial end of the line. It takes up about 20 feet with the interchange at the Pensie's Poorhouse Yard, hidden return and staging loop. It includes the early Sellers turntable. I don't know if any of you know what the Sellers turntable was. It's kind of distinctive because it has the round structural openings in the girder assembly. And there was a guy who actually made that as a kit a while back. Some of you narrow gauge guys might be familiar with a company called Bill Meyer and Small. They were actually based in York. They had a couple plants in York. One was on the Mon Pa. It was pretty much out of business by 1890, but I stretched history a bit and have kept it going into 1914. So I do have a representation of that, which needs to be filled out with a lot of detailing yet. And then there's a whole bunch of other industries. I won't read them all off, but it was quite a diversity of sidings for the Mon Pa to service, from lumber to oil to, of course, coal and even pianos. Next. Engine facilities were pretty sparse in York at this time. This is again the Sanborn map, but there's the Sellers turntable. Coal was loaded by a boom crane, and then some of the surrounding industries. The Mon Pa did not have a shed and it did not have a climax, but you know, how can you resist? Next. This is the Atlantic Oil Depot. The Sanborn map actually helped me figure out the pedestals for the oil tanks there. They were square brick structures, 20 feet tall. So this is that's a combination of SS Limited, Grant Line, and CC Pro kits in that picture. The coal dock down here is a fine scale miniatures kit that's been heavily modified. And this is a standard chain company, pretty big industry. You'll probably recognize that as a combination of Walthers and Railway Design Associates. I think it's the other company in there. All kind of kit bash. Next. Here is the York train station and freight house, also built from plans. So that's a pretty recent completion. And then that's a kit back there that Boss Scale Models did that I've made into a cap screw factory. I just finished doing that. I've been brave enough. This corrugated metal here came out pretty well, I think, but that's the kind of scary operation of dropping the Campbell foil siding into etching acid. Okay.
Too much and you get nothing.
Yes, that happens. And this is the Bill Myron's small facility. I have a lot to do on this. I want to show a couple narrow gauge cars under construction, piles of lumber. There's quite a bit of detailing I can do around that, but it's actually dual gauge track back there, so they could actually move things around both on narrow gauge and load it onto the Mon Pa for standard gauge transport. So there actually is a little narrow gauge tank locomotive sitting there. Again, for a lot of these buildings, the DPM modular kits came in real handy. Okay, next. Again, this is the York train station that actually still exists today. The mom and pop does exist today as a terminal railroad. Really, it's just servicing industries around New York. So that is their main, that's the office. It's actually I believe it's owned by the Genesee in Wyoming. They own all kinds of short line railroads all over the country. Next. And then we're coming to the end here. This is Poorhouse Yard. This is the interchange with the Pensy in York. I had to turn the interchange around instead of this being pointed west. It actually turns to the east, but and the track work at this location, mainly because of the Pensy's operations, was very complicated. So I just did a much simplified version of all that, trying to get that impression. Walters actually makes a kit of the signal tower that's there today, but that isn't the signal tower that was there in 1914. Next. So this is just what I have ahead of me. Probably looks kind of familiar to some of you guys. I have the York industrial area to finish, Delta Station and Main Street to do, the Bel Air Station and industrial cluster, the Mill District with the 3 South River mill kits. Lots of wagons, buggies, and Model Ts to put together. My wife just painted 50 Berkshire Valley horses for me.
Wow.
But now I need to make all the buggies to go with them. I need to do
Where do you get material for your wagons and buddies? Is that all?
from different companies, but I've been really impressed with this company, Berkshire Valley,
Okay.
has suddenly diversified from O scale to include a lot of HO scale. So Google them,
Berkshire Valley.
Berkshire Valley.
I think they're an MRH advertiser.
Right?
Okay, right.
And Model Ts and that's all from them too?
No, well,
Or do
no.
you use Jordan?
No, Interline makes some vintage cars and trucks.
That's what I'm having trouble finding.
Well, I have a couple hundred Jordan kits stashed away, so I hoarded those, and of course, I'm glad I did. Because they have all this stuff. I still have, this is where I'm really deficient. I don't have much rolling stock. At least I have roundhouse kits, cars as stand-ins, but so I have a lot of that to do. I have brass engines to backdate, to load up with DCC and sound, and I still need to work on my track work. Still ballast around the turnouts problem. Trying to get turnouts to work reliably after you put down that ballast. So anyway, a lot of maintenance work. This is one of those PFM engines backdated with the spoke pilot and the headlight changed out. Pretty simple backdating on that. Next, I think this is the end. Yep. And up at Pittock Mansion, they were selling these hot air balloons. They just happened to work out to be HO scale, or pretty close. So this gives you a view of this B&O Beltline represented. It's not actually a working, the interchange works, but it has nowhere to go. I might also mention this North Avenue Bridge back here. I cast that in solid hydrocal. So it's quite a heavy.
Would you use a rubber mold that it came from?
I used hardboard masonite.
So you had to carve out the.
It was just a lot of hydrocal. Then I haven't placed very many figures, but it did create this little scene in front of the Baltimore station. For German American Day, a little ironic that it's 1914, right ahead of the war, but.
Yeah, right.
It was a big honor of the population.
So we're just gonna mention, I'm kind of a loner in the hobby, and I'd be happy to get a little bit more networked with anybody who wants to come by and check out my layout. I live central Portland, northwest Portland, over by Montgomery Park, Montgomery Ward Building there. And so let me know if you want to come by. I have cards here if somebody wants to get back in touch with me. All right,
All righty,
thank you.
thank
Jeff.
you.
And I have 4 copies of the presentation if anybody wants a hard copy.
Working towards your MMR? Because I think that gets you an author's AP credit.
All right, I'll take it.
You do very well and you start out.
Thank you.
Nice work.
So we'll have to talk to Ross about that since apparently he had to go back to work. All right, Doug, can you go back and get that coffee can?
Yes, sir.
We're supposed to be out of here in 5 minutes. I don't think we're gonna make it.
There's somebody take the room.
Okay, are you supposed,
Oh, man, it's not.
excuse me?
So, is everyone welcome?
Yeah, everybody's welcome.
Yeah, this is model railroading.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
We're almost done.
Yeah, we're just about finished up here.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. And. Yeah, tickets out. Let's turn some lights on, shall we?
I won. We're done. I'm.
See the dark. Okay, Larry. Larry. You're gonna be a two-fisted holder.
Is that yours?
Yep.
Whichever one.
Everyone wins. Well,
Whichever one wins, it's Larry.
Yeah.
all right, 511, last 3 digits. Well, I think we know what Ross had.
Yeah.
Okay. 508. Bill.
We got 511 right here.
Yeah, 511.
Okay, come on up. And since one model does not make a contest, the award for the contest is back in the raffle. I hope suitably shuffled these up. So take that and pick a card, any card. And if you lift the flap in back, it does say how much it's worth.
Oh, good, we figured that out.
Yeah. Yeah, I looked at the first one, it said 50 and it was like, oh, good. And Bill, I'm going to let you pull the next one.
Pick the right one, Bill.
Okay, and that is 507.
That's me.
Okay. All fanned out.
Yeah, I'll pick on the edge here. I get 2. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Bob, I want you to pull another one.
Oh.
Yeah. Whoever wins,
process.
whoever wins pulls the next one.
There you go.
That is 519. Richard, our vice president. That one. This is gonna make great video of the backs of people's sweatshirts. And this is 515.
We're doing it in public audience, that way no one says there's any shenanigans.
Yep.
All right. I put mine back in.
Yeah.
There's always one.
Pick your card.
Oh, let's take the middle one.
Okay. Next one is 518. Larry, you're doing very poorly for me.
You're not gonna get anything in your sock this year.
Doug,
I didn't sign up, I didn't agree.
I'll take your extra work and draw the thing myself.
5:06. Bill, on up.
Tough choice.
Almost as tough as the next guy. And that is 5:14.
There you go.
7 o'clock.
You get the easy one. Great, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. There are two models back there on the display tables. You can ignore the one on the end, but the flat car is a remarkable upgrade to a basic MDC kit that I strongly recommend gazing longingly at. Aside from that, if we could stack the chairs and fold the tables and let's get out of here because people keep looking in the door.